today we're talking about accountability and goal setting. As Evan talked about yesterday, we're structuring this whole week in terms of leading yourself, leading others, and then leading an organization. Quick question for the group. Where do you think accountability and goal setting fits into that framework? Is it about leading yourself, teams, the organization? Yeah, I agree. I think it's all of it. Good thing to keep in mind as we go through this topic, a lot of what will be framed here today is about leading teams, but a lot of the principles are applicable across the board. Couple other quick questions to get us started. Raise your hand if you manage a team. Okay, maybe a little less than half. Accountability and goal setting matters whether you manage a team or not. Because you can hold your peers accountable, you can set your own goals, regardless of if you manage a team. Last question. Who wishes they had more accountability in their workplace? Nobody? Everybody feels like their colleagues, their bosses, has a good deal of accountability and there's no room for improvement? Maybe? All right. So let's get started. So today we're going to talk about the meaning of accountability. So we're going to level set on the definition of accountability. Then we're going to talk about accountability best practices. We're going to talk about goal setting as a key piece of what it means to have accountability. We're going to demystify consequence. So consequence, does everyone know what consequence means? Yep. So having a conversation with someone where you're talking about these are the consequences if you don't perform to your desired objective can be a tough conversation. But we want to try to demystify that and really talk about consequence in a way that's less threatening and more productive. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the roles of leading and managing. So we talked a lot about leading and managing today, and I want to come back to that topic and talk about leading and managing within the context of goal setting and accountability. So I'm not going to make a habit of reading the slides, but because this is the definition of accountability, I do want to read it word for word because it's important. So accountability ensures team members clearly understand and take ownership of their responsibilities. Accountability provides support without removing responsibility for action. It also involves monitoring progress and ensuring timely, high-quality execution. So we're going to talk about all of these different components in the next hour. Quick question for the group. Are there any components missing from here when you all think about accountability? Is there anything not on this slide that you think should be? Shared with you all yesterday, before I came to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, I was a management consultant. So I worked in business strategy. And management consultants, we like frameworks. We like talking about things in frameworks. And so this is the first framework you're going to see, but you're going to see more, I promise. So since we're in Austria, I thought it would be kind of cool to talk about the framework in the context of a waltz, since we're at the home of the waltz, right? So the three fundamental pillars of accountability, and in this context, again, we're talking about driving an accountability for your team, is to set expectations, provide support to your team, and then manage the consequences. Again, if the team falls short, there may be consequences, right? It may not be consequences for the individual per se, but it might be consequences to the patient. It may be consequences to the organization more broadly. One really important theme I want us to think about throughout this discussion is success depends on aligning to the needs of the individual. So if you're managing a team, if you're managing individuals, and you want to drive accountability, understanding what drives that individual, what that individual values, is going to be a key component for success, and we're going to unpack that a lot more this hour. Here's another framework I promised you we're going to be talking a lot in frameworks. Accountability is simple. So this is an acronym. It's about setting expectations, inviting commitment, measuring progress, providing coaching, linking to consequences, and evaluating process. So this is a deeper dive into this framework in a little bit more detail. We're going to really focus on the first 3 elements today and the last 2 elements, and then Scott later in the week is going to talk about providing coaching and having difficult conversations. So a key part for setting expectations is goal setting. There are different types of goals, and I want to unpack them a little bit further, and I'll explain why in a second. So first, there's approach goals and there's avoidance goals. Does anyone want to take a stab at what an approach goal is? How about an avoidance goal? So an approach goal is a goal where it's framed to achieve a desired outcome. So for example, I want to win the race. I want to win the race. That's an approach goal. It's an affirmative. I want to accomplish that thing. An avoidance goal is I do not want a specific outcome to happen. So I don't want to lose the race would be an approach goal. If you're thinking about framing a goal for somebody on your team, which of the 2 do you think is more effective? Approach? Does anyone think avoidance? So I don't think there's a right answer, but there are some different theories on this topic. So if anyone is familiar with some tenets of behavioral economics, there's a concept within behavioral economics called loss aversion. Has anyone heard of loss aversion? So it's this idea that people are more motivated if at the end of whatever you ask them to do, if they don't achieve it and it results in $100 out of their pocket, they're going to have to lose $100. They're actually more motivated than if they are given $100. So there's something in the psyche about losing is more impactful than gaining. But I also agree with the people that said approach goals are more impactful because I think it depends on the context, right? If you are a person that's oriented toward really wanting to help people and help people gain something through your efforts, then you actually may be more motivated by an approach goal than an avoidance goal. And the reason why we're even talking about this is to go back to that major theme I talked about a minute ago, which is really aligning how you think about driving accountability for your team in the context of what are the needs of your team members, what drives them, what motivates them. So I don't expect, myself included, I have a team of about 12 people. I actually have no idea whether they're more motivated by approach goals or avoidance goals, but I know other things about them. I understand what drives them. I understand, going back to Scott's bird discussion yesterday, I kind of know who's a dove and who's an eagle. And I can leverage that information to structure our projects, structure the expectations I have of them around what drives them and what motivates them. And if you personalize the work, you have a higher chance of success of getting the most out of your team. Goal setting also follows this linear process that we see here of process, performance, outcome. It doesn't matter how you're framing the goal. It doesn't matter if it's an approach goal or an avoidance goal. Setting up a good goal for your team should ideally follow this linear pattern. So what's process? Well, let's start with outcome. What's outcome? Outcome, let's use the race example again. Outcome would be, I want to win the race. That's the outcome. Anyone want to guess what the performance piece is of winning a race? Entering the race, okay. I'm sorry? Training. So that's actually process. So the process is, how am I going to win the race? What do I need to do to develop the form? So another example of process would be, I need to actually develop really good form, and then I can run faster, and then I can win the race. What about performance? I'm sorry?
Tactics. It's action. The race is self-esteem. The fastest results.
Yes, so somebody said result, really close. I would say it's, what time do I need? What's my target? So in order to win the race, I think I need to run the 100 meter in less than 10 seconds. So the performance is the target. So there's something called goal setting theory, and this is another way to think about effective goal setting. So there's 5 elements here. And I'll lecture a little bit on this, and then we're going to get to a lot more conversation. So the first part of goal setting theory is clarity. So do you have a clear, measurable goal? If you don't have a clear goal, or otherwise, if it's undefined, you won't be able to tell if you were successful or not, right? If I don't know what I'm achieving, I can't look back at it and say, was I successful? Challenge. And again, this is thinking about not just meeting the needs of the organization for which you work in, but also thinking about what is going to motivate your team and maybe even yourself to really work hard. And the thing about challenge is you want to strike this balance of having a goal that is challenging, right? I think all of you in this room have gone through incredibly strenuous studies to become physicians and doctors, so you like a challenge, that's motivating. If something is easy, I might not be so motivated. But also it can be demoralizing if something is too challenging, right? If you're setting your team up not to succeed, that's very demoralizing, and they're probably not going to give their best effort on the project or the objective that you're working toward. Commitment. So I think commitment is kind of the fuel for success when it comes to achieving goals. If your team isn't committed, that's problematic. And hold the thought, because we're going to talk a lot more about commitment later and how you can get that commitment. Feedback's a really important part of goal setting. And this entails setting up your project, setting up the work that you do, so that through the course of the project, you've developed mechanisms by which you can collect information to tell you how are you progressing along your project. And then the final component is complexity. And this really has to do with how do you manage complexity within a broader project that you might be working on. So the first part of managing complexity is recognize up front that there's a risk that despite your best efforts, you may have set up a project and you get halfway down and you realize it was actually too complex and there's just no way that we can achieve this outcome in time. So let's think about if you have a goal to lose 30 pounds in a week, right? That's a lot, right? You're 2 days in and you've only lost 1 pound because you created a mechanism by which you can provide feedback, right? I can step on the scale every day and I can kind of track my progress. Well, if after a day I've only lost 1 pound, but I have 29 left to go in 6 days, you probably gave yourself a challenge that's too hard, too complex. The second part about managing complexity is giving yourself a mechanism or opportunity to adjust your project if you find out that the goal that you initially started on was too complex. Both of these elements to managing complexity, they take time. So as you're thinking about building out a project on day one, make sure you're building in enough buffer or enough time so you can track progress and if necessary, pivot or adjust your project if you find that your task is too complex. So this is another way to think about goals. Has anyone heard of SMART goals before? All right, couple of hands. SMART goals is a goal setting theory that again goes back to this point of how to construct a goal, how to construct a project plan in a way that optimizes for success. So I'm going to walk through these elements, and then what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you all to take 5 to 10 minutes and apply the concepts that we talk about here to either your own leadership challenge that you're tackling today, or if you want, some other challenge you're facing or problem that you want to solve either at work or in your personal life. And then I'm going to ask a couple people if they would be willing to kind of share their application of SMART goals at the end. So the first element of SMART goals is a goal should be specific. And again, this is a similar thread to what I talked about a moment ago. The goal cannot be ambiguous. It has to be very clear-cut, because if people on your team, if you don't actually understand the goal that you're trying to achieve, it's a simple kind of concept, right? You're going to fail, right? You have to know exactly what it is you're trying to achieve. So be specific. Make it measurable. If you have a goal that cannot be measured, then how do you know if you are actually achieving the goal? So I think we all, as physicians, you all know the types of things that are measurable, right? Some of you are researchers, you're constantly measuring. What would be an example of a goal that would not be measurable? Yeah, I think that's right. 1 second. You can, as you say, you can measure a characteristic, a quality, but it's certainly not as direct as if I can quantitate something. If the end goal is I want to have 10 people on my team by the end of the year, it's yes or no, right? I either have 10 people or I don't. The minute you introduce qualities as the end goal, it's harder to measure, but as you said, there are ways to do it. Yes? Oh. Yeah? Yeah, so other things, feelings. Like, can you measure feelings? I guess you can, but it's a heck of a lot harder, right? it introduces a level of subjectivity, right? And so anything where subjectivity is involved to measure, probably not a good goal to be tracking against. Achievable. We talked about this concept already, right? If the goal is impossible to achieve, then what are we even doing here? Now, it's complicated though, right? Because you don't want every goal that you set for your team, yourself, your organization. You don't want it to be easy. If it's just easy, then are we actually achieving anything? Are we moving the needle? Are we making ourselves better as an organization? No, you're not. And so this is a little bit of art and not so much science. You want to have that healthy kind of balance of achieving something that will be challenging, i.e. make a difference, but also not something that you're set up for failure at the beginning. Later, the next hour, we're going to talk about building high-performing teams, and this idea of making sure that you or your team are not set up for failure. There's some really key tactics you can use to make that a reality. Relevant. So on Thursday, we're going to talk about strategy and systemness, and so I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here. But when we think about a goal being relevant, you want to take a step back and think about, well, in what context am I doing this work in? So what are the goals of the organization? Is the goal of my hospital to cure patients, right? If that's the main goal, if that's the mission, if that's the core strategic aim of the hospital, then if you have a team and you have space to kind of decide what your team is working on, you want that goal to be relevant to the core strategy, to the mission. So make sure that the goal you're set is relevant, not just because your boss will be happy because you're helping the organization achieve its goal, but honestly, the people on your team, they're going to be more motivated if they feel like the work that they're doing is relevant to the organization, right? People came to work in your hospitals or your clinics, I'm assuming in part because they wanted to make people better, right? So to the extent you can have your task and what you ask people to do on your team be tied to why they came here in the first place, and if you can articulate that and communicate that to your team, higher likelihood you're going to have success with your goal. And then time bound. This is really important. You want to have a goal that has a timing component to it. You want to be able to say, okay, in 3 months, we want to achieve this goal, right? Why do you think being time bound is important? Why is it important to set a time element? Yeah, so you should come up here on Thursday and talk about strategy implementation, because a big part of strategy implementation is about understanding the time horizons of different objectives and then making sure you're plotting them out in a way that resonates with people and people can point back to. And it's also tied into this concept of challenge and not setting your team, yourself, your organization up for failure if you're not matching the complexity of the goal to how long it'll take. And we're going to talk a lot more about that on Thursday. Yeah, all great answers. Another reason why it's important to set timing, I'll use Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. So we have, in the States, we have a term called analysis paralysis. Does that resonate with anyone? So, paralysis is if you can't move, you're stuck, right? Right? You can be in a car accident and you lose ability to function, right? And analysis is the act of analyzing data, right? So this concept of analysis paralysis is I could keep doing analysis, measurements, ideation forever, right? Is anything truly perfect? No. And so we talk a lot about at CHOP trying to get away from analysis paralysis. Do you think it's hard to do in an organization like CHOP, a big academic research organization? It's really hard. We have a lot of researchers, we have a lot of physicians that want to get the perfect answer, because in medicine and healthcare, right, you don't have a lot of margin for error. You have to be perfect. You have the life of a patient in your hands. You need to be perfect. You can't get it wrong. But in an organizational context, nothing can be perfect, and you have to know when good enough is good enough. And so by having your project, having your goal be time-bound, you get away from that analysis paralysis, and you're able to say, you know what, we did good enough, let's move on to the next project, the next task. Okay, so I will leave this up. I want to take 5 minutes, and I want you all to think about a goal that you have, again, in your personal life. It can be your leadership challenge or anything else, and try to write a goal for yourself that accounts for all 5 of these. And then in 5 minutes, I'm going to ask 1 or 2 of you to share it with the group. Great. So you had a lot of goals there. I think they were pretty smart. I think they were pretty smart. Was it time bound? Was there a time, right? Was it specific? Seemed pretty specific to me. Was it measurable? Right? I want to have this many procedures by this date. It seemed very relevant to the objective that you have as a leader of your clinic. And then I can't comment on whether it was achievable or not, but I'm assuming it is, because you're going to be the leader, so you're going to make it happen. Anyone else want to share? Yes. And then one more, and then we'll. So thinking about your systems, the systems in your hospital, thinking about your team, everything that your team you have on your plate, to think about, okay, ideally, like you said, you would have had it yesterday, right? But think about what's achievable, think about the limitations, what's possible within your organization, and set an aspirational date for when your team is going to be responsive to every email. So, maybe an example might be by a week from now, we're gonna be responsive to every email. Good. All right. Okay. So, we're gonna switch gears a little bit. And remember I said commitment is kind of the fuel to success when it comes to achieving goals? Well, now we're going to talk a little bit about how to achieve commitment. So, you can see the words up here. Accountability must be cultivated rather than commanded. Do we all know what cultivate means? Right, to grow, right? That's why we have crops here, to grow it. Why is that? Why is it better to cultivate commitment than to command it, to come down from on high and say, you all are going to be committed to this? Why? Yeah. Yeah, and remember the key theme is we're talking about what people value, what drives them, what are their motivators, right? And that's exactly right, perfect answer. So we're going to talk a little bit about how do you cultivate commitment. So one key part of cultivating commitment, again, is understanding what is your team value. There are a lot of different types of value. People value different things. Remember yesterday, Scott talked about at CHOP, what was it? 2/3 of CHOP wanted a thank you note, 1/3 wanted the money. Well, that's monetary value, right? Some people are just motivated by money. there's social value. So some people are motivated by how they are perceived by others or what their title is in a hierarchical organization. So if you have someone on your team, if all they care about is, I want to get promoted, I want to be the CEO, then when you're talking to them about why a certain goal is so important, you can frame that goal or objective in the context of, well, this will actually help you get promoted, right? For the person that cares about money, salary increase, right? You can talk about, well, in this organization, people that achieve X, Y, Z get a bonus. They get more money. Psychological. What's an example of psychological value?
Satisfaction.
I'm sorry?
Satisfaction.
Yeah, absolutely right. Satisfaction. So, understanding what gives your team satisfaction. This is a tricky one, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it in developing teams in the next hour. You're more likely to get someone on your team to perform above and beyond if the thing that you have them working on gives them tremendous satisfaction, right? Pretty obvious, not rocket science there. But you do run the risk, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit to building a high-performing team, you also don't want to just only give that person on your team that one thing that gives them satisfaction, because you may need them to be a more well-rounded individual, and so you want them to be exposed and work on different things. And so you have to maybe understand, well, what are the other things that they value, and can I leverage some of those things to get them excited about different areas, even if that area is not necessarily their passion. All right, a couple more things about cultivating commitment. So, there are 5 elements that are important to think about as you look to cultivate commitment. Here are a couple elements. So, hopefulness. What do I mean by this? Can you get people excited about the project? And again, what's going to be really important to getting people excited about a specific project? Understanding their values, right? What makes them tick. Clarity. Make sure they understand the why behind the project, right? Make sure they understand why we're doing it in the first place. This concept of pathways, it's similar to this concept of making sure that people on your team have the tools to succeed, right? That they're equipped to actually do the thing that you're asking them to do. It's helping them understand how they can achieve the project within the context of the organization. So you may have a project that you assign to someone on your team, and they may be junior to you, right? They could be new to the organization, and they may not know the organization well. So do you want to just say, all right, here's the project, go out and do it, if they're new to the organization? Probably not. They're probably going to have to know who are the right people that they need to go to in order to achieve certain things. And so making sure that the person on your team understands the right pathways within the organization to succeed is really important. Agency. Does anyone know what agency means? So, agency is a concept of when you feel you have agency, you feel like you have autonomy, you have the ability to go out and do the thing on your own and make your own decisions, right? You don't you don't necessarily need to be dependent on anyone. You can go out and do it. You have control. Now, within an organization, especially a hierarchical one, especially in medicine, you can't just like deviate from the protocol, right, and do your own thing. And so, by definition, no one ever has total agency within an organization. They're always dependent on someone else. Everyone has a boss. But how do you support people on your team to give them as much agency as possible within limits, so that they feel like they have control, they have a say, that they can make the project their own to a certain extent. And then timing is a really important part of cultivating commitment. So, and it's really connected again to this general concept of giving people the tools to succeed. If I hired a new chief of my cardiovascular clinic and I said, you need to hit that 20 procedure benchmark by the end of the week, do you think you're going to feel committed to that project? It's too much, right? You're going to be like, I give up. So you want to make sure that you're giving people a reasonable timeline so that they're not totally dejected or like, I have no shot, I'm not even going to try doing it. But then there's another element of timing, which is make sure you're giving people on your team a level of responsibility and a project that is aligned with where they are in their own professional development. And so that's like another timing component. If I'm going to ask a day one physician right out of medical school to go build up a clinic, how's that timing work for where they are in their professional development? Not good, right? So you want to make sure you're kind of matching people's skill set with the task you're giving them. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't give people goals that stretch them a little bit, that might be new, right? But you don't want the goal to be 100% stretch, right? You want people to feel like they have the tools that they need in order to achieve their goal. So again, this is summary now. Ways to improve your goal. Make it smart. Ways to increase the likelihood that your team is successful in what it is you need from them or want them to do. Invite commitment. Speak to their values. Take the time to have the conversations to understand what they want out of this particular job, what they want out of this assignment, and craft it in a way that gets them committed, gets them excited. And then words matter. So words matter when you're talking about this stuff. So when I am giving someone on my team a new project, there's a couple key words I like to use. Some of them are up here, others aren't. The first thing is, I want you to be successful. And I don't mean that in terms of, I want you to be successful, and i.e. achieve the goal. I want this project to be a success for you. I want you to be better positioned to achieve everything you want to achieve at the end of this project. Because you did this project, you're better off for it, right? You're one step closer to achieving your own personal goals. Of course, I want the project to be successful. I want the person to complete the task that they're given. And then I guess a question for you all. What words, so let's say you're in the first meeting, you're giving someone a really tough task. It's going to be a lot of work. What kind of key words would you want to hit on in that initial conversation to invite commitment, to get them excited? Doesn't have to be a word too. It could be a concept.
Me, not you, not him, but we are going to do it.
I love that. Did everyone hear that? Use we, us, and not you, right? So what is the we? Why we? What does that convey to the person?
Yeah, we are in this together. We are doing this together from the beginning to the end. We are all the way together.
Yep.
It's our common project. It's something that we are all working together for.
I love that. And what that use of we conveys that I'm here to help you succeed. I'm here to give you the tools you need, right? To get it done, and we're going to do it together. I love it. All right, 5 minutes left. So I'm actually going to skip this slide. No, actually, it's important. I should talk about it. Okay. So the last part, if we remember the waltz, the last part was managing consequences. This can be difficult. At the end of the day, a job is a job, right? Like, it's not all fun. And if there's no consequences in the environment, it may be less likely that the person's actually going to get up every day, right? Like, hit their mark, do what they're being asked and expected to do. So managing consequences is an important piece of the accountability puzzle, but it doesn't have to be this uncomfortable thing, right? There's smart ways to manage consequence. So we're going to go through a couple types of consequence, but I want to ask the group a question. Why is it helpful to understand the different types of consequences? Yeah.
One of them, or some of them may occur.
I'm sorry?
Some of them, either positive, negative, or
Yeah.
developmental, will occur at the end of the exercise.
Yeah.
So we have to plan how to handle it, whether it is good, bad, or whatever.
Yeah, so that's right. In some sense, the nature of the project will determine the consequence, right? Like, we don't have control over the consequence. So if the project is, we need to improve mortality rates by 10%, well, we know kind of what the consequence is for the project if we don't. But what's another reason why understanding the different types of consequences matter? And this is within the context of the individual's performance. It again goes back to this idea of what do they value? So a certain type of consequence, person on your team might not care, right? So if the consequence of not achieving their year-long project is they don't get promoted, well, if they don't care about social value or salary, they might not care if they don't get promoted. So understanding what drives them, again, is really important for managing consequence. So you're all going to get the packets. I don't want to run over time. And so the packets here kind of gives you an example of different consequences. And so I'll leave it for you all to read in your own time. I think I'll end with this slide. So we started off this morning talking about the differences between leadership and management. And we're going to be unpacking this all week. This is another way to think about the difference between leadership and management. Management is doing. Management is making sure that you achieve your goal, that everybody on your team shows up at 8 a.m. every morning, right? Like, there are just certain core things that managers have to do. They have to get the job done. Leadership is being. right? Leadership, we talked about being authentic. Leadership is being the thing, being the role model for other people on your team to follow. Why is leadership so important to having accountability and setting goals? Why is leadership important? These are components of leadership. We've talked about some, not all. Leaders inspire ownership. They empower and coach. They build relationships. They foster performance. And the other one, they lead by example. So if people see you as a leader and you're someone that they want to follow, they want to emulate, they're going to be more likely to take up that project you have with them, for them, with excitement and yes, absolutely, I'll do that. So it's important to make sure that in your own leadership style, you're doing the things that signal to your team that when they have a project that you give them, they're going to be empowered. They're going to get coaching, and that they're going to be inspired through cultivating that commitment. That's what leaders do. I love this slide as kind of a cornerstone of what it means to be a leader within the context of getting accountability for your team. Any questions, comments?